who are fluent in Spanish that can help you with the application process, answer any questions, as well as provide you Spanish materials for anything that you need for any of our rebate conservation programs. And yeah, that's it. I would be happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, I have a quick question. At least for the rebate programs, I was seeing all the examples for like houses. Do folks have to be owners to apply, and can people living in multi-family housing apply for these rebate programs? Part of why I ask is because most of the people who live in Division 4 are tenants. Do not own homes. And I also have a second question, but I can wait till.
Okay, yes. So you do not have to be a homeowner to apply for any of our rebates or receive rebate funding. You can be a renter. We do also, and I apologize, I should have included more multifamily examples, but multifamily properties can participate. It would just be something that you would either have to get permission from the homeowner or the property management company to be the liaison essentially for the rebate. But it is possible. It just requires like a little bit more coordination with the property manager.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, did you have a second question?
I can wait till he asks.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so my name is Izzy, the motion committee. So I'm asking concerning the rainstorm that we have in January. So my question is, from your projection, how long do you think it's going to last if we don't have such subsequent storms, till we get back to our crisis of using less water, sprinkling less? How long is that going to last?
Yeah, so that's a complex question. In regards to our storage capacity, thankfully, due to the recent atmospheric storms, we've been able to actually refill our reservoirs, and this is the first time we've refilled it, I believe, in 2 to 3 years due to the last drought, or due to the drought in California. Regarding whether or not there's like a timeline of when that will happen, to the scenario that you just described, Metropolitan and of course all of your agencies want to avoid that as much as possible. For anyone who lived in the State Water Project area, so if you lived in, like, for example, Los Angeles, the State Water Project, before we received any of these atmospheric rivers, we actually had the Emergency Water Conservation Program enacted. So anyone who received water from the who received water from the State Water Project actually had additional restrictions based on each of the agencies. So that included either limited watering schedules for outdoor irrigation, or it was a target, so they would have to decrease as an agency their overall demand of water for their entire agency. And this was enacted for about a year and a half. It was the end of 2021, and it just was rescinded this past spring. So yeah, a little over a year and a half. And all of the agencies actually complied. So many of them chose to enact either a one-day watering per week schedule, and some of them actually just met volumetric targets. So we obviously want to make sure that we're protecting long-term resiliency in the region, and we want to be able to always provide clean and reliable water for all. But in the cases where we do see supply issues, we work with all of the agencies to find ways in order to save water, but at the same time not, directly inhibit anyone from receiving water at the same time.
Okay, thank you. Just have one more question.
Yeah.
That question has to do with home water service. Do you have any incentive for home water service as an economy to save water? Do you have that?
So most of our home water savings incentives are just through the rebates I covered. So these are just essentially improvements that you can make to your fixtures, or for example, you're like removing your turf with sustainable landscaping to help save water. Those are our main incentives. Some of our agencies, enact pilot programs and work with homeowners a little bit more directly than what we can. Unfortunately, as a wholesaler, we can't work with our individual customers on like a one-to-one basis as your local water provider can. So all we can do is really just support through providing funding for all of these incentives, and also just provide funding to your member agencies so that they can create like specific to communities like home water savings programs.
And sorry, I forgot to introduce myself, but my name is Rosemary, and I'm the Southeast Lane Organizer with Communities for a Better Environment. Part of my questions are so technical is I'm trying to see if it makes sense to share these programs with the community members that we work with. But the question I have is also around like some of the requirements in that rebate program. So for some of the members that we work with, their homes are literally considered like toxic waste dumps. And they're in the process of waiting to get their soil replaced, but would those folks be able to qualify to do what was in those photos if they're like on the wait list to get that soil replaced? And we know that can be anywhere from weeks to months to some people waiting 7 years now. So
Yeah, so the great part about our rebate program is that as of right now, we don't foresee funding being exhausted anytime soon. So even if the process that they're waiting for takes months or potentially years, since 2015, we've never really shut down our program. There was one time in 2016, I believe we did open a wait list just because we received such an influx of applications, and we just wanted to make sure we had enough money reserved for all of them. But I can tell you that we have no immediate plans to shut down the program or its funding. Regarding whether or not they would qualify, I'm not too sure. But from my understanding, I don't see why they wouldn't, as long as they had turf to be removed. They should still be able to qualify because you're just removing the turf and installing it with more sustainable landscaping.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You talked a lot about existing situations. Do you get involved in planning? For example, if at one point somewhere out in Palm Desert area, they were going to have like a fake surf attraction, for example. Do you get involved in that, like weighing in on the amount of water that's going to be involved?
So it depends. If they're within our service area and it requires new connections, that's when we would get more involved. Or if it's if they are asking for a larger demand than what what we typically provide them, I believe that would open the discussion. When it comes to private business dealings, I would say, due to just our status of being a wholesaler, I would say we probably more so would consult, but unless it has something to do with specifically a water purchase or a water order, I don't believe we have as much power as local officials will. So I believe most of that power would default to the local planning commission or local city council, or if it requires, environmental, an EIR, environmental, I'm sorry, I forgot the environmental impact report, then it would require another agency oversight.
So, by the same token, for example, if there are wealthy people that have huge lawns and lots of pools
track that. All of our member agencies usually have a high water users list where they've identified the meters that are using the most amount of water. And we work with them to provide them some of our incentive programs. So one of the biggest ones, to the example that you mentioned, was the large houses with a lot of lawn and with a lot of pools or like water features. So we provide essentially the commercial landscape survey. We call it a large landscape survey. And we will send a landscape specialist to look at their pools, their landscape, everything on their property that's outdoors that uses water. And we provide them and the agency a report. And with that report comes with all of these recommendations on, you know, how they can save additional water, what incentives they can take advantage of to, you know, motivate them to make this change. But other than that, it would fall mostly on the member agency to then continue that relationship and that conversation on how they can save water after we've done our part by providing the incentive.
Thank you.
I'm just going to take one moment to break down the water wholesaler that Metropolitan represents. She's saying the water wholesaler is like the Costco of water, and how you have to have a membership. So they're the Costco, LADWP is a member, Los Angeles Water District, Los Angeles Department of Water. So when she's saying a wholesaler, they're selling to your local agencies, just to break that down a little bit.
Thank you. Yes. So we sell to 26 member agencies across Southern California. One of the biggest ones in this area would be LADWP.
This is easy, the emotion committee. So the question I have is on the top program. So our community is a very poor community and heavily congested with toxins and air pollution. And we are working hard to see that we have more plants and more green area in our community. Now, with this program of top program, which is removal, I'm using top, how does that balance the environmental aspect of cleaning the air?
So our tour program, we have requirements. So for example, we try our best to look after the ecosystem and really try to promote sustainable long-term landscapes. So as part of that, we do have a sustainability feature requirement. In the examples I showed, they chose to do a dry river creek bed, but you can even do something as like a rain barrel or a rain garden, things that essentially collect water and keep it on your property, where other plants or other you know, trees or anything on your property can reuse the water and save it. And then in regards to, I know you mentioned, sorry, I lost my train of thought. We do have additional programs, I will say, for underserved communities too. So one of our biggest programs is our pre-1994 program. So if you live in a multifamily property that was built before 1994, your property can receive free toilets. So typically the property owner will connect with or partner with a contractor, and that contractor will work with us and they will install the toilets for the property, and they'll receive a higher rebate for their activity for doing it in a pre-1994 building.
Question? Yes, my name is Felipe Aguirre from Comité Roman Maywood. I wanted to ask you, what relationship does MWD have with the mutual water companies? Specifically in our community, the water companies always tell us that they're glad that they don't take water from MWD because supposedly it's too expensive. And they get the cheap water from underground aquifer, which is like 99 cents water. You know, the quality is really, really dubious. So I want to know what relationship you guys have or would like to have, you know, in our community.
Yeah.
With the water surveyors.
So essentially, and I can't think of the term that we use, but we have ongoing connections with that agency. So although they may not be taking our water, they still have to pay essentially a fee to Metropolitan that in case of an emergency where they need water and they're unable to provide all of their customers that water, they have emergency access to MWD water, and so they can essentially, put in an emergency purchase order and use Metropolitan water if their supplies cannot adequately fulfill their needs for their community. But in regards to how much we work with our 26 member agencies, we don't have the same relationship because of the fact that they aren't one of our member agencies. They are just acting as a community partner, I would say is the best way to say it, where they have access to our water if they need it, but they primarily choose to use their own sources of water instead of essentially becoming one of our member agencies.
But you do have a relationship with Central Basin, right?
Yeah, Central Basin is one of our member agencies.
And Central Basin covers our community.
Yes. But Central Basin also has multiple retailers. So how it works at Metropolitan, as Caroline mentioned, so we're the Costco, and we just sell water, which is all the products, to all of our member agencies, which would be the stores. And in the stores, you can have, smaller companies come in, like local companies come in, restaurants come in and sell their own stuff at Costco, but it's only related to that Costco. That would be the same situation in this case, where some of our local agencies do partner with private water companies, and these private water companies essentially act as because they're private water company, they act as their own agent, and therefore we as Metropolitan don't necessarily have a lot of, we don't have a lot of control or weight into how their sources of water are taken or treatment or any of that sort. It's kind of on their end.
So, question, does your agency service areas like Maywood, Cudahy, Bell, even though the water companies there don't take water from MWD?
We do, I know Bell we do. I would have to double check on Maywood. So because of the private water companies exist, there are in our map little outliers, or there's little pockets of areas where we don't service at all, but we do have emergency connections there. And in those cases, we don't provide our incentives there. We don't provide any funding there because they're not part of our member agency. However, Central Basin is our member agency, so I would just have to connect with the Central Basin Water Conservation Coordinator, and that's something that would just have to follow up with her.
One last question.
Yeah.
So then, we live in Maywood, so we can't qualify for any of your programs because our water companies don't take water from MWD. To Central Basin.
Okay, so if you guys are the private water company as one of the retailers in Central Basin,
We're mutuals.
yeah, I would have to double check with. I would have to double check with the conservation coordinator, and to see how they establish their funding essentially. As